morning. It's another one of our first fives today. We're looking at this text from Nehemiah chapter 1, beginning with verse 4. We'll get to it in just a second, but I'm glad you're joining us this morning. And maybe you have been participating with us in our spring training series. It's going on Sunday mornings. But in that series, we're talking about spiritual practices. What are the trainings we can do to where we find ourselves growing spiritually? And one of those that we've been talking about this week is fasting. And fasting is one of those things that none of us love to do because most of us like to eat. And if you don't like to eat, I don't know what's wrong with you. No. But we'll find this text from Nehemiah is fascinating to me because Nehemiah has given some news about how Jerusalem is in ruins. The gates have been destroyed, the walls have been knocked down, and Nehemiah, this is what he's just hearing as he's a servant to the king. And so here are the words that Nehemiah we find in Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 4. It says, "When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." And I'm going to get to Nehemiah's prayer in just a second, but did you notice Nehemiah has just heard this news that's so great that he doesn't know what to do with it. This news is so big, it breaks his heart. It leads him to a place where he weeps. And even in his just depth of despair, he doesn't know what to do. And so what Nehemiah does is he says this, "I don't know what to do, but I know one who can respond to this, and it's God." And so in his place of despair, in his place of concern and fear, he weeps and he fasts. And so then here's what we find after these words in which he said, "I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." And then, after all that, here is the prayer he gives. So out of his time of fasting, he then finds the words that he gives to God. And here are these words, verse 5 on. "O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commands. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, 'If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this servant and to the prayer of your servants, who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man.'" So see, here's what happened with Nehemiah. He heard what had happened in Jerusalem. He fasted, and he wept, and he prayed. And then out of that fasting and out of that time of prayer, he came to the place where he prayed to God that God would give him what he was going to do next. That he would give him success as he went to the king. And he said, as he went to the king, like, "Can I go back to my people? Can I help repair the city of Jerusalem?" And he was granted favor in the king's eyes. And so just as the cupbearer to the king, he's sent back. And you know the rest of the story maybe. If you don't, go read Nehemiah. It's a cool story of God doing this thing through this guy who's just a normal guy doing his job, but has compassion and is compelled for the sake of others. And so maybe you and I need to recognize that when we go to God in our fasting, in our prayers, when we're heartbroken for the world around us, that in those moments that we come seeking God's guidance and God's counsel and God's wisdom, he will compel our hearts to a way of life and an invitation to something we never saw coming. And what Nehemiah knew is this: God has this covenant of love with his people, and he says, no matter how far you are from me, if you'll turn to me, I'll bring you back. And the truth is, today, maybe you feel so far from God, but the truth is, all it takes is turning towards him. It doesn't matter how far we are, he brings us back to him. And so sometimes we need to fast because we see there are people who are far from God. And we just need to fast and pray that maybe they'll just turn back to him. And so today, I don't know if you're someone who feels called to fast for what you see in the world around us, for this virus or whatever else is going on. And if that's you, then turn to him. And if it's not you, and maybe you feel like you're so far away from God, here's what he says to us again and again. We see it in Nehemiah. We see it all throughout the words of Jesus. We see this invitation to turn back to him. It's the woman who's caught in adultery, and she says this, and Jesus dismisses all the other people and says to her, does no one condemn you? And she said, no one, Lord. And it's just Jesus and her, and he says, well, then neither do I, but go and sin no more. In other words, turn from the life you've been living and come back to me. And what Nehemiah does is he goes to a people and says, hey, let's turn from the way we've been living and go back towards God. And so what might happen if you and I fasted and prayed? What might God compel us to do? Because Nehemiah was, he was special, but he was nothing more special than you and I. And he did some incredible things for the sake of God and his work in the world. And so what might God have in store for you and I? We'll see you tomorrow, and we hope these first 5 are valuable for you as well as they are for us.